TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Thank you so much for joining us here on TNT. We're in the second hour of this live broadcast, and as mentioned before the break, we're going to be pivoting right now back to the Middle East. Now, there's been some very interesting developments that haven't really been covered in the mainstream media, especially regarding the country of Yemen and the role it's playing in the resistance against Israel and what it's doing to the Palestinian people in Gaza. And to help us look at this story a little more closely, to glean some more insights here and some bombshell information I'm sure we're going to get, I want to bring onto the stage right now award-winning journalist from Sana'a in Yemen, Yousef Mawry, is joining us right now on the live link. Yousef, it's great to have you with us.
Hey, Patrick. Good to be here again, as always.
Yousef, appreciate you coming on the program as well. Now, there's been some very interesting developments, as we've discussed previously, and what's unfolded in the last couple of weeks regarding what Yemen has been doing. I've seen reports. I'd like to get your, confirmation on this, that Yemen test launched its first hypersonic missile in the last week. This is something that we've seen the reports of, as well as U.S. and other allied ships, and also ships and commercial vehicles that have been transporting material support to Israel have been intercepted and hit as well. Also, military vessels from the United States and the UK have been involved in incidents as well. Just give us a kind of update, Yousef, on some of the significant things that have happened in the Red Sea, near the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, regarding Yemen and these other countries. Go ahead.
Well, these military operations are happening on a daily basis now. It used to be once a week, with when it was round one of military escalations, and then we went through round two, round three, and now we're still in round number 4 of the Ansar Allah's military escalations, and this is what they've declared, and they proclaim to be round 4 of military escalations. So that's first and foremost. So 4 phases, each phase more attacks, each phase more targets, and with each phase more suffering of these ships and companies that are blacklisted in Yemen's official ban list, right? The ban list has expanded. First it was the Israeli-linked ships. Then it was Israeli-linked ships, British ships, and U.S.-linked ships, because they are attacking Yemen, because they started the air raids on Yemen. Now we're just, we're growing accustomed to seeing these daily attacks being waged from Yemen's Ansar Allah. The only thing new really is the new weapons that are being used. You mentioned the hypersonic missile, and this was, for the first time in Yemeni history, this was revealed. And the way that it was revealed, remember I told you, the only time we will see the new weapons is when they are activated, when they are launched to hit a specific target. And that's exactly what happened last week. Ansar Allah used the very first Hatem 2 hypersonic missile to attack the Transworld Navigator vessel, commercial ship that was blacklisted for shipping to occupied Palestine. So that's a game changer. You basically have a weapon now that is able to bypass most air defense systems. And guess what? They also targeted the U.S. aircraft carrier, the Eisenhower. And then the U.S., of course, they denied that the Eisenhower was hit. And then this was followed by Ansar Allah officials, Muhammad Ali al-Houthi, with an open challenge to the U.S. to broadcast
I think we may have lost the signal there. We'll try to get Yousef back. Might have lost the line there. we'll bring him back there. In the meantime, while we're waiting for Yousef, I want to bring on screen a news article exactly what he was alluding to there. The USS Eisenhower, this is a flagship aircraft carrier of the United States Navy. This is from the Navy Times. I'll bring this article up on screen here of the USS Eisenhower. Now, this was arguably, this was weeks ago, and the accusation here was that Ansar Allah, aka what the West call the Houthis, in Yemen, that they hit and damaged the USS Eisenhower. Here we have the Navy Times. Eisenhower carrier heads home as Houthi attacks continue in the Red Sea. Why did it head home? Why was it doing evasive maneuvers there? A lot of people suspect, and there are reports that it did sustain some damage there. Was that because of an Ansar Allah missile attack on that aircraft carrier? If it was, this is a huge embarrassment for the United States. It's also a game changer because when's the last time that a U.S. Aircraft carrier has been interdicted or attacked by a state actor? It certainly is not out of the realms of possibility with the weapons that we're talking about here, hypersonic capabilities on the part of Ansar Allah. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, this is a new era of military engagement in the Middle East. And you talk to the punditry, the news experts and so forth in the United States, and they seem to be still in denial that things have shifted. That the balance of power has shifted radically in the region in favor of the, quote, axis of resistance countries, collectively, Yemen being one of the emerging forces within that matrix. I think we have Yousef Mawry back on the line. We'll see if we've reconnected him here. It looks like we've got him back. Yousef, I was just bringing the reports that the Eisenhower was taken out of the region and supposedly for repairs, routine repairs. So there's a lot of credence to what you're saying. A lot of people do accept that it's probably likely that they sustained damage as a result of being, engagements with Ansar Allah, military engagement. So that's a game changer in history, Yousef. No one's ever seen that before. No U.S. aircraft carrier has ever been hit. It's not something that happens. And what's the response? Airstrikes against various targets in Yemen. Have any of those airstrikes by Britain and the United States, have any of those been effective? Have they hit their targets as far as you can tell, Yousef?
Well, they've hit a radio station and a number of mountains and empty land plots. And, in order to believe that the U.S., because the U.S. is launching these operations, and then the Central Command Station is posting on their Twitter page that they've successfully disabled Ansar Allah's, or Houthis as they call, the Houthis' ability to launch missiles. So, the evidence is right there before everyone's eyes. It's very clear that Ansar Allah is only getting stronger and stronger with each passing day and each passing week. Look, we've introduced the hypersonic missile here in Yemen. We've also introduced the unmanned drone boats, which are very effective, very, very effective. In fact, most of the direct hit is coming from these unmanned drone boats, which, they don't cost a lot of money. They're very easy to maintain. They're not costly. And look, we're talking about Bab el-Mandeb, the Red Sea, where these ships are trying to cross a narrow path, a choke point, which stretches in width, 20 kilometers. So it's not that, it's not that wide of a gap to go and cross this dangerous sea undetected. These vessels and these commercial ships that are affiliated with Israel, they thought that it's a smart idea to turn off the AIS so that way they cannot be detected on by the radar devices, the tracking devices. But what's funny is it's kind of a stupid strategy, because these ships, when they cross Bab el-Mandeb, you're able to see them with binoculars, with scopes. So they can turn off the AIS They can try to go undetected, but that only draws more attention to them when they are trying to cross the Red Sea and they have not declared who they are, what their intentions are, knowing that there is a full blockade on any affiliated ship with Israel or any company affiliated with Israel. And these companies are trying to turn off the AIS. They try to cross, and once they are seen, scoped by the Yemen's naval forces, they are attacked, no questions asked, because you're crossing a dangerous area. You know what the situation is. There's no reason why the AIS should be turned off. So Ansar Allah is always advising that these ships should turn on their radar and should communicate with Yemen's naval forces as the only measure to avoid being potentially hit by these missiles, by these drones, and potentially even hypersonic missiles. So these risk mitigation insurance companies, these maritime insurance companies are having a horrible time, a very difficult time, because they're scrambling, trying to figure out what they should do, what should be the strategy in advising these vessels. Now, off the top of my head, I don't understand why any company, why any vessel would jeopardize their crew members to cross Bab el-Mandeb, knowing that they are banned and knowing that they are putting the ship, the captain, and the crew in the line of crossfire. It's very bizarre to me, because I think in any other, if this was a conflict with any other country than Israel, I think then most of the ships would seek another route to go about their shipping activities. But because it's Israel, and because the U.S. is supporting Israel, they don't want this to be a moral victory, a public victory for Ansar Allah, to basically declare that because these attacks are successful and they've hit their targets, they would prefer to keep things under the radar and to continue forcing these ships to cross the Red Sea, so that the Ansar Allah movement doesn't win, doesn't get a acknowledgement for their successful military activities.
And just to be clear, if a hypersonic missile, you're saying that Ansar Allah have demonstrated that they can, the accuracy on these are that they can hit a ship at sea, normal size ship, with accuracy and land impact. Is that the case with these?
I mean, we're talking about a hypersonic missile that's able to travel 1 to 4 miles per second with great accuracy. And that's exactly what happened, what we've seen unfold last week with the use of the hypersonic missile. It's being used tactically and strategically to send a message that we're able to hit any vessel. And I can tell you this, Patrick, the reason, when you talk about the timing, why right now? Because we've seen this hypersonic missile displayed 2 years ago in the military parades by Ansar Allah. If you go on YouTube and you search military parade from Ansar Allah, you'll see that 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, this weapon was displayed in the capital Sana'a during the military parade, right? So why are Ansar Allah using it right now? It's because they're sending a message to the U.S. that we will hit any aircraft carrier. We're fully capable of hitting your aircraft carriers, whether it's the USS Eisenhower, whether it's the Roosevelt aircraft carrier, which is a more offensive military weapon at sea, which is also accompanied by 6 to 8 warships, each one containing 800 missiles. 800 missiles, right? So and those are air defense missiles. So they're there specifically to protect the Eisenhower, the Roosevelt aircraft carrier from being attacked. However, if you're talking about 800 air defense missiles, Ansar Allah has no problem launching 800 drones, which costs $100 to $200 in order to deplete this air defense system. And then once that happens, it'll be susceptible to an attack from the hypersonic missile or even just a normal ballistic missile. Because I'm not even sure that even the supreme air defense system of the Eisenhower and the Roosevelt aircraft carrier will be able to intercept the hypersonic missile. And this is the lowest of the low of hypersonic missiles used by Ansar Allah. This is the Houthi 2. They still have a Houthi 3. They still have, bigger hypersonic missiles that are able to travel faster and hit targets in longer distance.
And as you said, Iran demonstrated this on April 14th when they overwhelmed the Israeli anti-aircraft batteries, so much so that at the end, their medium-range ballistic missiles were able to then go through the Iron Dome and land at a sensitive military facility within Israeli territory there. Israeli had held territory in occupied Palestine. So it has been demonstrated that strategy does work. Certainly, this is something that Hezbollah can also deploy against the IDF. But really what that means is that U.S. Navy preponderance that they've enjoyed up until this point now comes into question, Yousef. And if that's the case, that those offensive naval vessels that you're talking about, they also form the defense deterrence for Israel in the event of any attacks like we saw in on April 14th. Those ships provided cover. They shot down quite a few projectiles, drones, etc., coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran during the initial salvos there. So if those aren't able to hold their positions in those bodies of water, then that basically hurts Israel's defense, that their deterrence envelope, as it were. So then they're exposed. So that's another sort of second order problem that then comes into consideration here. So all in all, Yousef, it seems that Ansar Allah is stepping up in terms of their capabilities, and that's actually having an effect with regards to the military equation in the region. Go ahead, your thoughts on this.
I think the biggest weapon that the U.S. has exercised and enjoyed over the past 5 decades, 6 decades, basically right after World War II, is the fear element. The U.S. is not used to countries defying it. The U.S. is not used to countries not going and answering the call of order from the White House, from U.S. military officials. The biggest change that has happened recently is when the genocide began after October 7th in Palestine. The U.S. issued a statement and mandated that all regimes and all movements in the region, they not get involved with what they called the war between Israel and Hamas. Ansar Allah replied back to the White House, to the U.S., that Yemen is not a country that takes orders from the likes of you, quote unquote, to the U.S. Biden administration. And then on that same day, that's when we witnessed the very first military operation by Ansar Allah, which targeted Israel with a missile, and that sent shockwaves across the world. And then the following week, we seen Ansar Allah capture the Galaxy Leader vessel. We've seen Ansar Allah then, just from that point, we've all seen the attacks that have been taking place. So the fear element that the U.S. has enjoyed all of these decades is no longer an effective war military weapon that they can use, because Ansar Allah is setting the example to the world that they have nothing to fear. They're also sending the message to other regimes that if you say no to the U.S., they really can't do anything if Yemen is on your side, if Iran is on your side, if Hezbollah, if Hamas, if Syria is on your side. And this is what Saudi Arabia is starting to realize. Saudi Arabia is starting to distance itself from the United States, even though they're proceeding very, very cautiously. But they're smart enough to see when a ship is sinking, and they know the time to jump off that sinking ship. And this is what we're seeing with the negotiations taking place between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But in short, and I can tell you this because I do interviews with a lot of mainstream news networks. They call me, but the only difference is that, what's very strange, Patrick, is these mainstream news networks, they don't want to cover the Ansar Allah attacks on these vessels. They don't want to cover the U.S. Eisenhower being attacked by a Houthi Ansar Allah missile. The only thing they like to cover on their networks is when it's the U.S. that's on the offensive, when it's the U.S. doing the bombing, causing chaos, destruction, when it's the innocents being killed here in Yemen and Palestine and Syria. It's very, very strange, and it's almost it's very evil that mainstream media wants to cover only the crimes, the genocide, and the brutality by the long arm of the U.S. and Israel. But when the table is turned and it's the Israeli, U.S., British ships and interests that are being targeted, when it's the Eisenhower that's abandoning the Red Sea, abandoning its mission and heading back home for repairs, it's not being covered by mainstream media. And that's because mainstream media wants to continue this illusion that the U.S. is the almighty powerful, and that Israel and the U.S., the West in general, are the ones who call the shots. If you don't go with the program, if you don't agree to the U.S. Western agenda, then you will face chaos, destruction, and bloodshed, similar to that experienced in Syria and experienced in Yemen, and that which is being experienced by the Palestinian people in this genocide. So if that's not the reality anymore, with considering what Yemen is doing, the military initiative by Yemen, Syria, the Islamic jihadi factions in Iraq, which are also carrying attacks against Israel, this is not something that suits their agenda. So they prefer to shadow ban these military achievements by the axis of resistance. And the only time they really want to cover Yemen, Syria, is when it's Yemenis being killed, and it is the U.S. and the British and Israeli and any Western country doing the attacks and causing the bloodshed, and putting it out there for the world to see that anybody who crosses the line, anybody who doesn't go with the U.S. agenda, they're going to be susceptible to starvation, to deaths of innocent people in the hundreds, tens of thousands, and a blockade. Basically everything that was experienced in the 10-year war that Yemen faced, and despite that, Yemen came out on top, and now Yemen is on the offensive, and it is the ballistic missiles, the drones, the unmanned drone boats that are doing the targeting against the Western interests in the region.
So what's interesting about what you're saying here, Yousef, is that this is a whole new security architecture for the Middle East. This is the very thing that many people, including former Foreign Minister Javid from Iran, articulated years ago, saying that this is absolutely possible. Everybody kind of scoffed and laughed at it at the time. What are you talking about? But the tables have reversed. Before it was, if you did, if you accepted U.S. protection, then you wouldn't be attacked by Al Qaeda, or you would somehow enjoy some sort of special status in the region. But now it's like if a country, if a Gulf states, if you're allied with Iran, Yemen, and the axis of resistance countries, and nothing is going to happen to you, nothing negative anyway. But if you're allied with the United States, you're then exposing yourself to a whole host of problems. So that's a total inversion of the previous security pact, unofficial pact, if you will, in the region, Yousef. That to me is historic.
Well, that's exactly why. That's the message that the axis of resistance wants out there. They want the message that if you You don't have to depend on the protection of the U.S. to stay in power, to keep your people from starving, to not face the brutal war imposed by the West. And on the contrary, as you mentioned, and this is a very important point that I think your readers should understand and even contemplate for a second, the main goal of these military operations carried out by Ansar Allah and the Axis of Resistance is to show these regimes that are allied with the U.S. that not only will the Axis of Resistance protect you if you choose to cut off the hand of U.S. meddling in this region's internal affairs, but if these regimes like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, if they choose to continue to support U.S.'s agenda in the Middle East, Israeli agenda in the Middle East, then they are opening themselves a door for Ansar Allah to carry out attacks against them. And this is the message that hasn't been declared openly, but it is being sent. It is a message that's being sent indirectly to these regimes that if the U.S. does not cut its ties with Israel and the U.S., if the UAE doesn't cut off its ties with the U.S. and Israel, then the UAE will be attacked by Yemeni hypersonic missiles. The Saudi Aramco oil facilities will be bombed and annihilated by Yemeni hypersonic ballistic missiles. Any country that carries out the agenda of Israel and the U.S. and secures their interests, they will be susceptible to attacks from Yemen, first and foremost, and from the Axis of Resistance, because they're not backing down. And I can tell you, even that the genocide taking place in Palestine, whether it ends a month from now, whether it ends 5 months from now, let's say it ends tomorrow, the agenda of Yemen's Ansar Allah and the Axis of Resistance is going to continue. Their goal is to undercut U.S. and Israeli military options from the region. Their goal is to not have a single trace of U.S. military presence in the region. And the reasons for that, they're countless. It could be because of the false propaganda that was used to bomb and invade Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction, the invasion of Afghanistan, the war that they instigated in Syria, and now the genocide that they are supporting in Palestine. The region has there's no reason why the U.S. should be allowed to carry out its interests and preserve its interests in a region which they have spilt blood for many, many years and continue to do so. The U.S., even with the presidential debate a couple of days ago, I'm sure you watched it, but you can see that the two presidential candidates, it's like they cannot escape the shackles of the Israeli Zionist lobby. They have to prove that they are wholeheartedly with the Israeli agenda. No questions asked. So this is what's going to lead to the U.S. no longer being allowed in the entirety of this region. And any country, any politician, or any official who wants the U.S. to maintain its dominance, its supervision, its hegemonic international architecture in this part of the world, they're going to be in greater danger than if they were to rely on the blanket cover from the U.S. Because the U.S., I can tell you, is not going to be able to protect Saudi Arabia if the Axis of Resistance decide to wage an all-out attack on Saudi Arabia. The U.S. is too weak. They can't even get rid of or attack damage of military installations possessed by Ansar Allah. So this is the message that's being sent to Saudi Arabia, to Sisi, to King Abdullah in Jordan, especially them, that the time to change is now. If they don't change their internal and foreign policy towards the U.S. and Israel, then they will have to deal with the consequences that awaits them from the Axis of Resistance.
And it's interesting to see Turkey, really taking a much stronger stance against Israel, imposing sanctions, pretty much a full, at this point, 97% trade blockade that Turkey has, strident statements by President Erdogan, of course. So they've made an effort to separate themselves from Israel in every possible way, at least publicly. And of course, that means, with the United States, Washington has to basically accept that's where they are on that issue. But that leaves basically the key, who you said, these are the key states: Egypt, Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, and of course the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia has moved into a very, very neutral position, but very vocally opposing the genocide and the Israeli regime and what they're doing, pushing hard for Palestinian statehood or resolution to the issue. So that leaves these three countries: the UAE, the Kingdom of Jordan, and Egypt. And so the most precarious of those, however, if you want to put them in order, Egypt is what it is in terms of a major recipient of U.S. aid, IMF aid. Their military dictatorship is more or less locked into position. Nobody sees that being dislodged anytime soon, but we could be wrong. And the UAE, of course, same thing, very, very much dyed in the wool GCC, a Gulf state monarchy with big financial networks globally now, and a lot of influence that they're pushing in terms of what they're able to achieve in the region. But the Kingdom of Jordan doesn't have nearly the clout, the economic strength, but yet they are actually partnering with Israel militarily on a number of different levels, and with the United States and Britain, of course, on the intelligence and military levels, puts them in a very precarious position. But as we learned on April 14th, Yousef, without Jordan working for Israel, Israel wouldn't be able to defend itself against attacks from Iran or anybody else. I mean, they're so crucial, aren't they? The Kingdom of Jordan, they're almost like the sort of fraternal or Siamese twin of the state of Israel, the regime in Amman. Israel wouldn't be able to do half of what it's able to do, if not without Jordan basically cooperating with it. This is an extremely precarious position that they find themselves in now after October 7th. Your thoughts on that situation?
All it takes is one spark to overthrow the regime in Jordan, and likewise in Egypt. The only way that the population in Jordan and Egypt can be contained is through the rule of the Iron Fist, which is employed by King Abdullah and by Abdullah Fattah al-Sisi. However, what do you think is going to happen when Hamas comes out victorious, Hezbollah comes out victorious, Yemen not only comes out victorious, but also comes out as a regional superpower, right? With a growing explosive economy, perhaps one of the strongest armies in the region. And to add to that, you have the backing of Iran and from a distance, Russia. Russia, which, in order to secure its interest, they need to align their interests with the axis of resistance in order to undercut U.S. influence in the region. And every U.S. influence, Israeli influence, is aimed at weakening Russia on a global scale. So this is why the genocide is continuing. Hamas needs to lose in order for Egypt and Jordan to remain proxies of Israel, right? Because the public is going to turn against them. The axis of resistance is going to turn against the regime of Abdullah, King Abdullah and Sisi. Sooner or later, you're going to start seeing military defections, especially in Egypt. You're going to start seeing military defections. Let's not forget, the biggest opposition political party in Egypt is the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas has very close ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood also here in Yemen, they're beginning to rechange their strategy. They're obviously, they went to war with the Ansar Allah. However, now there's negotiations taking place between the Muslim Brotherhood and Ansar Allah. So you basically have this wave that will seek to wash ashore all of the remnants of the Israel and the Western superpowers. King Abdullah and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, their fate is going to be perhaps even tragic in the near future if they remain on this course, because I can tell you that with Ansar Allah has plans. They're not just going to only target Western interests and Israeli interests in these oceans. They've mentioned, the leader of Ansar Allah mentioned that pretty soon, very soon, U.S. interest is going to be targeted in the region. And you know what that means, Patrick? The U.S. interest is these Arab regimes who are extension of U.S. imperialism in the region. So when the leader of Ansar Allah says we're going to erase all of the U.S. interests in the region, we're going to annihilate the U.S. interest that expands throughout this region, they're talking about attacking the regimes. So you're talking about the Saudi government, the Aramco oil facilities being targeted by Ansar Allah because Ansar Allah views Saudi Arabia as an extension of U.S. hegemony in the region. You're talking about the Jordanian regime being targeted. And you can only imagine what, Hezbollah, Ansar Allah, and the factions in Syria and Iraq have planned for Jordan, because Ansar Allah and the axis of resistance, they know that Israel's not going to go away, or Israel's not going to be defeated unless there is a regime change in Jordan and in Egypt. So that's something to focus on and look out for in the future, perhaps sooner than we expect. Don't be surprised if in the coming months you hear a declaration from Yemen that, because the genocide is continuing and because the Jordanian regime is enabling this genocide, that Ansar Allah declare Jordan, the government of Jordan, to be on the blacklist and for them to be targeted from Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and even from perhaps Hezbollah.
Isn't it true, Yousef, that one of the hangover issues of the U.S.-sponsored war against Yemen from 2015, really still to the present, in fact, but let's just say from 2015 to 2022, one of the hangover issues there is one of the co-belligerents in that U.S.-led war against Yemen is the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and that they're still illegally occupying Yemeni territory. They've actually stolen territory from Yemen and are occupying it militarily along with their partners and proxies. Is this actually true?
Yes, it's very true. They're actually occupying the island of Socotra. They're building military bases there. They're occupying and building military bases in the island of Mayun. And there also exists UAE military presence in Hadr al-Maut, in the province of Al-Mahra, and the list goes on. Basically, any province which is not under the control of Ansar Allah, you have the UAE Saudi-led coalition forces in control. They control Aden, they control Sheba, they control actually most of the provinces that that are considered the economic boom, that have the oil, that have the gas. I can tell you, Patrick, that Ansar Allah has plans to take full control of Yemen. It's just a matter of time, especially with the U.S. encroaching, with the U.S. beginning to reinforce, resupply, and even there's talks right now of the U.S. planning an all-out attack on the Sana'a Ansar Allah government by leveraging all of the UAE and Saudi military factions that are on the ground. So, if what you will see perhaps is a war in Yemen, in the contested areas, where you have Yemeni fighters that are allied with the U.S., the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, they're going to try to advance and take over some of the Ansar Allah controlled areas. And I project that you're going to see signs of that in pockets of Hodeidah. You're going to see that in pockets of Taz. And once that happens, it basically opens the doors for Yemen's Ansar Allah to say, okay, the ceasefire agreement is no longer in effect. And considering the military power that Ansar Allah has on the ground, they're going to take full control of these areas. They're not going to be held back from taking over the provinces that are backed by Saudi Arabia and the UAE, because we've seen them do it in 2015. If you recall, Ansar Allah, they took over Aden, all the way into Aden. They had the military forces over there, and that's when the Saudi-led coalition actually began. But I suspect this will happen sooner rather than later, because I think Ansar Allah is very well aware of the dangers that it faces, and realizing that fighting the U.S., Israel, and the British Army on one front is hard enough, but if the U.S. is smart enough, they would spark this conflict from within, and these forces backed by the U.S. will start to move in from the south of Yemen towards the north, and then compile that with the U.S. air assault from Saudi land, from the Saudi airspace and from the Red Sea, from the Arabians. Ansar Allah will have a lot on their plate to deal with.
Yeah, so that is in the works, ladies and gentlemen. Yousef Mawry, award-winning journalist from Sana'a in Yemen. We really appreciate your analysis and your insights on this very important issue this week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Till next time.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Follow Yousef. We've got him tagged on our show post on X Twitter. Listen, that's all we got time for today. Big thank you to Piers Robinson, of course, Yousef Mawry, and a bigger thank you to you, our listeners, our viewers here on TNT. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Patrick Henningsen, your host, signing out.